The attic hadn't been touched in decades. Dust gathered like a second skin over every memory tucked away in cardboard corners. Margaret Langston, now 74, stood at the threshold of it all, heart trembling beneath the layers of a life mostly lived in silence. She hadn't planned to come up here, but sometimes, grief had a way of pushing her up old staircases. Her granddaughter Lily had asked the simplest question earlier that morning. "Grandma, why is there a lock on the red box in your sewing room?" Margaret had smiled tightly, her teacup quivering slightly. "Just old letters, darling." She hadn't touched the red box in 37 years. The truth was, the box held more than letters. It held a version of herself no one in her family knew existed. Not her late husband James, not her children, not even herself. Not really, until Lily's innocent question breathed life back into those long-buried days. Margaret had always been a careful woman. Reserved, modest, dutiful. She wore her hair in tight buns for most of her life, her skirts always below the knee, her shoes sensible and soundless on hardwood floors. She was the kind of woman people trusted with secrets, never realizing she carried one so heavy it nearly split her in two. The year was 1985 when the secret began. James had taken a 6-month teaching position overseas. The children were grown, the house was quiet, and Margaret had, for the first time in her life, real solitude. That's when she met Evelyn. Evelyn was a painter. Wild, barefoot in the backyard, often with paint in her hair and clay on her fingernails. Margaret first saw her while returning a library book. The library had a small gallery space in the back, and Evelyn's art exhibit was on display. The paintings were loud, passionate, unapologetically human. Margaret didn't know what pulled her back to that gallery each day. She told herself she appreciated the boldness of it. But it was more than that. It was hunger. Not for Evelyn, not exactly, but for the unspoken parts of herself she had buried in motherhood, marriage, and Sunday casseroles. They became friends quickly. Afternoon teas turned into long walks. Conversations deepened, laughter loosened Margaret's shoulders, and one day Evelyn painted her. Fully clothed, seated by a window, light casting delicate lines across her aging face. That painting would end up in the red box. Nothing scandalous happened, not by the world's definitions. But inside Margaret something seismic shifted. She began to write again. Poetry. Letters she never sent. She tried on colors she had never worn. Emerald, burnt orange, sapphire blue. She felt herself unfurling, like a flower that had been waiting for the right light. Then James returned. And Evelyn left, moving to Santa Fe to pursue a teaching position. They wrote for a while, but Margaret never responded after the last letter. She folded that version of herself up like fine linen and tucked her into the red box. Life resumed. She became a grandmother. She went back to hosting book clubs, baking pies, listening instead of speaking. Her hair went white, her shoulders softened, her memory stayed sharp, especially the parts she never said aloud. Until today. Standing in the attic now, she held the red box in her hands. It felt heavier than she remembered. She brought it downstairs and sat at the dining table, hands shaking as she opened the latch. There were the letters, hers and Evelyn's, the poems, the sketches, and the portrait Evelyn painted. Margaret stared at it, remembering how seen she had felt. Not beautiful, not youthful, but alive. When Lily returned later that afternoon, she found her grandmother seated at the table, red box open like a wound. "Grandma!" Margaret looked up. For a moment she considered lying, brushing it off. Instead, she said, "There's something about me you don't know. But I'd like you to." That evening they talked. Margaret didn't share everything. Not the ache, not the nights of restless longing, but enough. Enough to unbury the truth gently. Lily listened wide-eyed. Not with judgment but with awe. "I never knew you were an artist," Lily whispered, holding one of the old poems. "I didn't either," Margaret smiled. Not fully. That night she didn't put the box away. She left it open on the table like a guest that was finally welcome. In the weeks that followed, Margaret joined a local art class. She began painting again. Her hands, though frail, remembered the strokes. She wore color. She wrote letters she did send. Not to Evelyn, who had passed 5 years ago, but to herself. Letters forgiving, letters tender. At 74, Margaret had not reinvented herself. She had simply stepped into who she had always been, not in defiance but in truth. And sometimes truth takes decades to open.